that asset visibility of what's connected and communicating across your OT and cyber physical systems environment is becoming commoditized. It is becoming like the base standard minimum requirement. And ultimately, that area is the fat bit in the middle, I'd say, because the challenge is that the problem is so big in terms of the vulnerabilities that are being identified from these physical assets and the task of remediating them.
Welcome to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. In each episode, we dive into the world of industrial cybersecurity. Join us as we cover the latest trends, innovations, and practical insights as we talk with leaders and practitioners across the industry. Gear up and let's get into this week's episode.
Hi, I'm Dino Busalachi, and today I have with me Simon Chassar, a colleague and a friend who I've known for probably almost 10 years now, thinking all the way back to my Claroty and Rockwell days back in the beginning. Welcome to the show, Simon.
Thanks, Dino. I really appreciate the invite. Thank you.
Yeah. I know we just met 2 weeks ago down in Miami at S4 and caught up some. And I guess to start off, maybe give the audience just a brief description and bio of what you've been doing from now back into the last several years.
Yeah, I think keeping the focus on sort of CNI and OT, I go back, I was the Chief Revenue Officer and Executive Vice President of NTT globally for cybersecurity. And I saw this sort of emerging trend and requirement to deal with OT and IoT cybersecurity through my organization and through my services and technology that we were bringing to market. And therefore, I made a move into the vendor space, and that was with Claroty. And I became the Chief Revenue Officer at Claroty when they were relatively small, about 18 million ARR and about 200 customers or something, single site manufacturing and CNI. And I took them through a journey to over 125 million in 3 years, about 1,000 customers. I think I was personally involved in about 100 of those, sorry. And we went to about 56 countries. So that was a great journey. And in the last couple of years, I've been an investor in OT, IoT, and AI cybersecurity companies. I've been an advisor for many organizations that are, I suppose, innovators in the OT or cyber physical systems, cybersecurity space. And I've been an advisor for multiple private equity organizations on OT cybersecurity and VCs, as well as raising funds for some of these cybersecurity startups. So yeah, it's been a bit of a ride. And yeah, it's good to catch up at S4 and give you a bit of a view of what I've been doing.
Yeah, well, you were a great mentor for us and many other partners, I'm sure, because you had a lot to do with building the partner community for Claroty also at your time at Claroty, right? So what would you like to cover today? I mean, you have your fingers in a lot of different things in this particular space, so you have a wealth of knowledge and information that would probably be very beneficial to our listening audience.
Yeah. Okay. I think that as I said, I'm an advisor for multiple companies, and they're all very closely aligned, but in slightly different niche spaces. And whether that's traditional sort of OT, IDS organizations or OT SOC companies through to distributed energy to analytics, physics, T organizations to renewables, you name it. So I think one thing I'd comment is I'm seeing that generally there's a couple of fundamental shifts that are occurring around CNI and OT. And I won't talk about the regulation and the geopolitical threats and those sort of things, because that is all ramping up significantly. But I'll just say around the sort of OT tech space, OT cyber tech space, I'm seeing this sort of two polarized shifts. And there's this shift to the right and there's this shift to the left. And if you think about what has traditionally been going on, where the first generation OT cyber tech companies, the Nozomis, the Clarotys, the Dragoses of the world, plus the former companies like Security Matters and Intergy and CyberX that were acquired by Tenable and Microsoft, etc. That asset visibility of what's connected and communicating across your OT and cyber physical systems environment is becoming commoditized. It is becoming like the base standard minimum requirement. And ultimately, that area is the fat bit in the middle, I'd say, because the challenge is that the problem is so big in terms of the vulnerabilities that are being identified from these physical assets and the task of remediating them, that it is unable to be done with the fact of planned factory shutdowns, even some process manufacturing facilities can't even be shut down, and to try and address that sort of connected underbelly of the vulnerability. So everyone's sort of making this shift out to what I call the right and the left. And I'm seeing the shift to the right being that, okay, we've got to move to more of a threat-led, data-driven landscape view of our environment. So that move to more of a SOC, perimeter protection, that sort of services overwatch piece, enabling us to put that perimeter protection around the environment. And the reason why is that they need to be able to then sort of protect what's coming in the environment. And that's then also driven into policies and segmentations that then are coming off the back of that. I'm also seeing that there's this sort of shift further right, which is if I need to get a single source of my industrial code lifecycle management, my factory in a box, so that I can actually do backup and disaster recovery across all of my automation, project files and automation systems. So when I do get hit, I can recover. So I'm seeing those two shifts. And in terms of the OT SOC as a service piece, that big pain point of I want to move from my first line of defense as the OT plant operator to the first line of defense as my SOC in the 3 lines of defense model, where traditionally it's been very hard because of low fidelity data quality, high false positive alerts, blowing up the SIMs and blowing up the SOC. There's also this emergence of, okay, how do I look at second generation sort of OT asset visibility technologies to eliminate, I'd say, the false positives and drive a higher fidelity of the asset. So that's that shift right that I'm seeing occurring. And there's some really great organizations which are picking up on that in the market. The shift left piece is, okay, how do I think about secure by design from the beginning around my manufacturing facility or my CNI? And how do I think about the things like the SBOM and other activities within the components that are within that environment? As well as how do I use sort of attack simulation, or how do I look at sort of OT TTPs to really help me prioritize around what areas do I need to focus on and really put my efforts behind a security strategy around business continuity versus the ones which maybe become afterthoughts, less of a business continuity risk for the enterprise or the organization or nation state. And so those are the big two things that I'm seeing really happen. And that's driving some really interesting, innovative tech that is growing fast, and some innovative services organizations which are growing fast. Yeah. So that's what I would like to mention.
Let's talk about services for a second. One of the things that I've witnessed over the last 10 years, especially a lot of clients that have invested and bought some of these OT IDS platforms, is they do it from a self-performing standpoint, right? Trying to do it themselves. And I've seen this tech turn into shelfware, right? Because however it entered into the environment, the client never got the visibility that they were really chasing, right? And I've seen the numbers are pretty staggering, right? Companies that have had a tool like Claroty for years and maybe seeing 30, 40% of their assets on their plant floor, not knowing how to get to the rest because they self-perform, versus maybe looking for organizations in the partner community that specialize in this arena that works across a wide spectrum of manufacturers, whether it be food and bev, chemical, oil and gas, automotive, mining, etc. How have you? We're not seeing a change in that. To my point that I bring up a lot is I don't see the IT leadership in a lot of these companies trying to reach into the system integrators and OEMs that are the primary driver of the tech that they have in their plants, at least from a support standpoint, because a lot of manufacturers don't even have controls engineers, right? They rely on third parties to do that. And so this self-performing activity, I find, is not being very fruitful for organizations trying to drive this themselves. I don't know if you see that differently. Have you seen that as a success when you talk about IT/OT convergence, which we've been talking about as long as you and I have known each other? It just hasn't gelled is like it should be. And I think a lot of it is because they're not branching out and trying to find out who are the best in class organizations out there to help them, and maybe not try to self-perform as much as many of them try to do, but maybe you see it differently.
I mean, I'll give you my opinion. I mean, I'd say that the stark differences between somebody who is and has the skills of understanding an operational automation environment and those that understand cybersecurity theory and or practice is that one is a vocational sort of pursuit in your life and one is an academic pursuit in your life. So in essence, somebody likes sort of plugging things in, building things, and the other person likes to sort of apply the theory and the applications of practice through academia to solving a problem or a challenge. And there isn't enough skills that are in the operational automation environment that understand the dynamics of cybersecurity or digital safety within the environment and how to apply that, because cybersecurity is moving so fast and so quickly that they still need to keep the plant operating. And at the end of the day, they've got to sort of deal with what's in front of them now. So you're right that actually the skills in the market, we haven't done enough to boost the skills and the personnel that are out there to be able to be available for some of these bigger, what I say, needs that we have to do to protect this sort of critical infrastructure of the Western Hemisphere in a way. And the challenge is they mostly live within boutique organizations, boutique service partners, because they are homegrown, come out of university, and they've gone through the sort of the practice, and they've been working from a young age, building plants and building and dealing with pumps and sensors and making conveyor belts work and goodness knows what. And they may have then diversified into cybersecurity, but they're still living in their sort of very local remit. And therefore, there's a lot of good skills in boutique partners and providers. And there's also a limit within the larger, bigger organizations in terms of some of the scales of these global environments, because you pick someone like UPS or something, they've got like 1,400 sites worldwide. You take a BMW, they've got like 400 sites or something. It's just massive across the globe. And there's such a disproportionate variety of skills and expertise globally and in different partners and providers that it's just been a challenge. And I know, I've been hiring some resources and skills for some of the companies that I'm representing and working with. And they're commanding 30 to 40% more in OT cybersecurity than they do in IT cybersecurity, because there's just such a shortage of them. And you're looking for a particular capability that is unique to sometimes each organization. You'll get the same automation vendors popping across different companies, but the design and the subcell architecture and the way in which they deploy Purdue or not Purdue, it's just totally different in terms of some of the SCADA environments.
Yeah, because I believe that the OT ecosystem, as I call it, has to get better at this, right? In providing digital safety, cybersecurity strategies built in. They're going to do it with AI. It's coming today. It's like they're leapfrogging over their security apparatus to go after the AI piece. And then it's like, well, you're going to have to come back and layer that in at some point. Why not do it at the beginning, right? Like I would say, if you're a big Claroty shop and you've been using Claroty for years and you're getting ready to put in a new packaging line, you would think that you want to design in your cybersecurity technology and the sensors, if you will, at that control layer during that new packaging line build out, right? Instead of trying to do it retroactively, which is costly, more expensive.
Well, that's what I mean. That whole secure by design shift left. Everyone's now the greenfields. I built it from the beginning.
Yeah. And I think AI is going to drive that potentially, right? There's some really cool things going on out there in that space, and it's getting to the edge, right? The last mile, as I call it. And the technologies that are going out there, they're not islands anymore. They're not just local networks, as people still like to call them. It is connected to something. Even if it's somebody going out there with their laptop and plug it into that local network, into that control system, that's still a connection. You don't know what's on that laptop. You don't know if it's got a cellular modem on it. You don't know if it's got Wi-Fi on it. It's got Bluetooth on it. What else is it connected to while it's in that environment? What's it bringing into your environment? If we go into 10 plants, 8 of them will let us take our own laptops and go plug it into their plant, right? To support them, to get them up and running, get the startup going, or whatever downtime they took because some new features and functionality wanted to be added. They were going in. Remote access is still Wild West. On average, Simon, we'll find 4 to 7 different remote access technologies being used in a single plant. And if you've got 30 plants in your fleet, well, then do the multiplier on that, right? And a lot of times IT is not even aware of what that OEM put in that machine center for remote access.
Look, there's so many cool things happening. I'm involved personally in a UK company, and we are about to launch our own new software, which is integrating I suppose, OT asset sensor information with IT threat feeds and also with AI that is driving an AI sort of L3 SOC analyst capability trained on IT and OT TTPs to detect and help isolate or provide playbook for isolation, containment, and remediation for OT specifically. That's like separate, but also the compliance requirements and generating auto compliance, and that's going to be launched in the next month or so. But as I'm seeing others move towards that space, and if I look at the way in which we think that AI is going to change things. I mean, I was speaking literally with a global steam production company. They're deploying Copilot everywhere. And the problem they've got is that it suddenly started to look at unstructured data and telemetry feeds and other things which are coming from outside the corporate network into it. And it's uncovered things like passwords, plain text passwords, unencrypted, no cryptography or any encryption on it at all. And they're just going, we have a massive problem. This AI has quickly identified things that we didn't even know about by looking at our unstructured data and everything else. And now it's going into a public AI system. So now we've got to sort of put some controls and governance around what can be shared with the public AI, because we haven't dealt with the risks at the edge. And I'm working with a company which is really pushing the boundaries on physical AI and data notarization. And they are effectively driving a blockchain-based encryption for data feeds in from unmanaged and off-network devices to inside the corporate network, so that you can provide an immutable zero trust of the data that's coming inside. So you can almost, I suppose, protect the provenance of the AI feeds of manufacturing facilities. And that's going to really disrupt the PKI and CA or certificate authority type business landscape, because just authenticating a connected device to your corporate network is no longer any good. You have to go way beyond that, because you've got to protect the data from manipulation and data poisoning. Most of the first generation sort of audit tools aren't really looking at the data poisoning manipulation side of the house anymore. They're sort of using broadcast and multicast and unicast approaches and passive listening and or flow-based analysis. And this is going to really create a challenge where, can you trust what your AI model is telling you around what is your production volume units and your supply chain connected ordering requirements, etc., if somebody manipulates it or poisons it, or even, like you say, someone brings in a piece of a USB drive or laptop and it completely corrupts the data feeds in, that then if we rely on AI for all automation of rule sets and even supply chain, we start to create a global just-in-time manufacturing economic challenge by having it all connected. A lot of stuff said there, but you know what I mean.
But the funding is mysterious to me in a lot of cases, where there's not a lot of focus on funding for an OT technology, cybersecurity, maybe AI, but especially on the cybersecurity front. Most of that budget's always tied up with the IT organization, from my view. To the extent of, I know the resources constraints that are out there. I mean, trying to find people that have the background that want to work in an industrial environment, right? I mean, you can think globally, but you still got to act locally, right? So you can come up with a grandiose plan and strategy on what you want to do, but to be able to execute it, you're going to need help. And those that wanted to try to do this, like I said earlier, self-perform, it's almost a non-starter. You're only going to get so far, right? And so the funding, do you see a shift in investing budget into this space? Because when I think of private equity specifically, they're not spending money on capital to replace equipment. They just run it till it breaks and just barely keep these plants running. And they'll steal parts from other plants that they're shutting down to domino into another plant. And I just don't see the funding model like you would see in IT. It doesn't have that same momentum or motion.
I would say that I'm on the board of about 3 companies, and I do see that cybersecurity is, and our adherence to regulation, but also protecting the organization and even the wider portfolio companies' environment. So, like from the private equity point of view, and if they have multiple portfolio companies that are within it, and I'm in one of those, protecting the overall organization, it is a boardroom topic, and it does have time on the board meeting, so that is focused on. I think that there's definitely, with regulation tailwinds that are really getting quite crispy now, I'd say, really sort of quite spiky, that is driving effectively boards to consider and allocate more funds towards physical systems, cybersecurity strategies and solutions. It's still not enough, in my view. I think there still needs to be more done, because if you think about all the budget that goes into IT cybersecurity, in essence, like PII data now on the market is like $10 each. If you're in a black market, resell that stuff. PCI is at about $20. I think PMI data is about $100. If you think about that in the context of just, I don't know, 20,000 users getting their data stolen from some database, that's a couple of $100,000 of reinsurance that they need to do with some credit check company. That's about it. No lack of impact. They get hit on their production facility, they're down for 2 or 3 hours. That's like 5 million out the window, output done. It's a completely different risk model. So I can see that boards do have to make that shift, and they need to sort of deprioritize. The challenge that exists is that there is this budget in IT where 70% of it is already pre-spent every year just on renewals of existing stuff. And the cycles needed to move away from that and or to change to a different strategy is just so much man days of effort for CIOs and CISOs that it's just not really addressed. And only 30% of that budget is really broken up on dealing with new threats and new landscape risks and innovation investments to look at what do they need to do ahead of the curve for future potential risks. And that's it. They don't really have this ability to go, right, I need a brand new pot of money over here because I've got to go protect the business and operational resilience. And I need to go build what is effectively my IT cybersecurity strategy, but it's separate on an OT side. They're not doing that.
Right. And that gets back to what I said earlier about the OT ecosystem has to drive this, right? They have to start carving out their budget for this and finding those organizations to assist them with that, because if IT could do it, they'd be doing it, right? They would. And the answer to that is they're not. I mean, they're doing some, but it's not enough, right? There's a lot of blind spots on that plant floor that IT just does not have the responsibility or the accountability to deal with the control systems per se, right? And so that's where I think the OT ecosystem has to really step up and start driving this to the board, because they report up differently. The OT side and IT typically report different paths all the way up to the top of the organization. They're just not putting together their own plan and strategy. And I think a lot of it has to come from the industry that they typically rely on to buy this equipment from, to get the support, to deal with the technology that comes in from these OEMs and system integrators, to start recognizing what they're dealing with. And maybe AI will be the thing that changes that narrative potentially. I don't know.
I mean, I've definitely seen the sort of accountability is being aggregated around the CISO for both IT and OT now. I mean, I think that it is, with the regulatory changes that have been going on, it's definitely the buck stops with that individual. I think it's still been a huge orchestration game across multiple resources on different sides of the house. So on the operations and supply chains side of the house, there's still different other resources that need to be coordinated from the CISO and the IT cybersecurity and network and so on, to bring together the outcome. So there's a lot of coordination that goes on there. But
Because of the responsibility to that point that's landing on the CISO's desk is, why aren't they looking to find out who are the top 4 or 5 integrators or OEMs that are working and operating in their plants today? What are you doing? Who are your partners? What kind of practice do you have? What kind of resources do you have? What do you know about my specific challenges from a cybersecurity perspective and about my business, right? Which is a lot, right? A lot. But I don't see that being connection. I don't see that CISO picking up the phone and calling their top integrators, because I would know, because we're one of them, right? I mean, we're one of the largest food and beverage system integrators in the country, in North America, right? And we're not getting those phone calls from that IT leadership asking for help.
because I think a lot of it is still coming from the top-down advisors. So if you think about the traditional sort of accounting advisors or digital transformation advisors that are coming in from the IT side, a lot of those are driving the narrative down the organization. And that sometimes dictates who's selected for projects. Whether they have the skills or capability to deliver it or not is another question. But that's where you're seeing it coming down, because it's such a top-level topic at the board. that's how it's coming into the organization versus a ground up. This is what I need, local skills, solve the problem. I've got this relationship here, let me bring them in. So that's maybe what you're seeing as a difference. I do think I see some risks in the future ahead. Risks and positives. I mean, it depends how you want to look at it and what lens you're looking at. But with, I think, some of the exits that have occurred, like the Armis exit to ServiceNow, with the Nozomi exit that occurred, and the sort of new funding round raises that have been going on with some of the others that are out there, you're definitely starting to see that some of the bigger players are going, right, now OT is a mainstream thing. I need to buy in and acquire. And there's a lot of acquisition talk that is going on from some of the traditional, I'd say, IT cybersecurity, network cybersecurity organizations, looking at how do they make their move. But also at the same point, you've got people like the Rockwell and you've got the Schneider and the Siemens, the automation vendors also going, well, okay, how do I make my move in? Because Honeywell made their move in as well. How do I then protect my space in this environment? So there's definitely going to be a lot of, I think, acquisitions and roll up occurring over the next 12 to 18 months on, I would probably say, the second generation, because some of the first generation guys are pretty expensive now. So they'll be sort of mainly pulled by the bigger players, but you'll then get some of the slightly risk-averse smaller players think about, I want to make a strategic shift, so I'm going to buy some of the smaller, newer tech. And then the bigger first generation with the big customer base are going to go to some of the bigger guys. And that's going to be good for the industry, but it also means it gets wrapped up as another with another mainstream cybersecurity vendor.
So you mentioned SOCs earlier. So how do you see the OT SOC development going out there, specifically around OT SOCs, right? I mean, we don't have one. We would probably leverage a supplier that does that. And one of our
I can make an introduction for you, Dino. I've got an excellent one for you.
yeah, but it's key because a lot of clients are asking for it, right? I mean, we do have clients that are asking for SOC support. We provide 24/7, 365 support, managed services, but eyes on glass, we don't have. And those are expensive to build, right? And it's a huge investment. And so what is that environment shaping up as, right? And I'd love to follow up on that conversation in regards to whoever you're talking about, because we want to have that conversation with them. I mean, we just turned down a job because we didn't have the SOC.
So I was fortunate to sort of do some work for some private equity firms. As part of that, they're all sort of talking about this is the next direction. This was about 9 to 12 months ago. I then had an opportunity to go into a UK security cleared sort of ex-government intelligence sort of founded tech company, UK sovereign sort of organization that does IT SOC, and we've evolved the capability to be OT. And so we've moved over towards OT. And since then, it has been an amazing journey with public sector, what you'd call federal and critical national infrastructure organizations in the UK that are looking for that OT SOC. That shift to my first line of defense as the OT, as the SOC provider versus my federated, distributed. It's been amazing. And I think that the only thing I say is people need to understand it slightly differently. You need to have the full data visibility before you start looking at whether you've got a Modbus fuzzy attack. You need to understand what the IT threats are. So you need to do the IT environment, because there's a lot of traversing that goes on from IT to OT, which can create impacts as well. You've got to create real sort of anomaly indicators of compromise so you can see some of those living off the land sort of adjustments that might be going on. And it's about bringing tech together, making it work harmoniously. And there's only so much you can do around dev on that without using AI. You need to use AI in that sort of strategy to be able to give you that full view. So I see it as a big growth trajectory. I'm seeing it personally with this organization that I'm involved in. And I'm seeing more and more, what I'd say, traditional SIs, MSPs asking for a backout OT SOC provider because they can't build it themselves. They are getting asked for it, and they can see it as a separate track to their own IT SOC and almost non-competitive. And they can see it as, from an operating playbook perspective, they can have the IT SOC on a swivel chair with the OT SOC as the third party who specializes in it and deal in the coverage that they need for the clients. And if you've got the right AD Active Directory structure and store systems and playbooks, you can bring in the OT plant operators to be part of that remediation activity when you do find something like a Modbus fuzzy attack or whatever it may be.
That's a conversation I'd like to carry on further at some point. Is there anything that you'd like to cover that we didn't cover in our discussion today?
Oh, I mean, not really. I think that from my side, it's been great speaking with you. I totally respect your view and opinion in the market. So I love to learn from you as well around what's going on, especially in the States. And from my side, I'm touching all sort of areas of a lot of emerging tech around IoT and OT. So feel free to invite me back whenever you want, and I'll give you my views. So no, it's been great. Thanks, Dino.
Yep, thanks, Simon.
Thanks for tuning in to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. To stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to click the follow or subscribe button now. And if you found this podcast helpful or have a topic you'd like us to discuss, please leave us a review or let us know. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.